All right, let's talk about poetry. For a lot of us, the word itself can feel, well, a little intimidating, right? Mysterious, even. But stick with me, because we're about to demystify the whole thing and give you a new way to see just how powerful it really is. So let's just get this out of the way. Have you ever thought that poetry is just a bunch of confusing rhymes and stuffy, old-fashioned language? Yeah, I think we've all been there. But honestly, looking at it that way kind of misses the whole point of what poetry is even trying to do. Because here's the secret. At its heart, poetry isn't some puzzle you have to solve. Nope. It's really our attempt to answer a super fundamental need. The need to express what it actually feels like to be human. You know, all the messy, beautiful, confusing, and amazing parts of just being alive. Okay, so if it's all about the human experience, we have to ask, what is poetry really? To get to the bottom of this, we need to understand that poetry is chasing a completely different kind of truth than what we're used to. Think about it this way. You've got factual truth, right? That's the objective stuff, the data, the events, what happened. But then there's emotional truth, and that's all about what it felt like when it was happening. Poetry lives and breathes in that second space. It's all about our emotional reality, trying to capture those big universal feelings, love, loss, joy, you name it. So, if that's what poetry's made of, what are its building blocks? Well, it all boils down to one simple idea: action. And we can think about action in two different ways. First, there's external action, stuff you can actually see, like someone running or fighting or traveling. But then there's the internal action. That's the whole universe inside our own heads, our thoughts, our feelings, our secret struggles. And that is where poetry really shines. It gives a voice to that rich inner world. And that's really the poet's main job, isn't it? They take some deeply personal experience, something they felt or saw or imagined, and they use their craft to transform it into something that suddenly clicks for all of us. They make the intensely personal feel totally universal. So, how on earth do they do that? How do they make these feelings feel so real and powerful on the page? Well, that brings us to what I like to call the secret language of poetry. I absolutely love this quote. It just nails it. The idea that sometimes our regular, everyday language just isn't enough to capture really deep or complicated experiences. To talk about a tough life, or a ridiculously happy one for that matter, you need a language that's just as powerful and just as complex. And here's how that tough language actually works. Our everyday speech follows really strict rules for grammar and punctuation, so we can be literal and clear. Poetic language, it knows the rules, so it can break them on purpose. It uses line breaks to create rhythm, it messes with word order, it layers meaning upon meaning. So next time you see a rule being broken in a poem, remember, that's not a mistake, that is a very deliberate choice. Now, one of the coolest tricks in this secret language is how it can take something totally abstract, like a feeling, and make it feel completely solid and real. I mean, how do you describe hope? You can't exactly point to it, so poetry has to find a way to make you see it. For instance, by saying something like, "Hope is a fragile bird." And just like that, boom, this abstract idea now has an image. You can picture it. You get that it's delicate, that it could fly, but also that it's vulnerable. That right there is the magic of metaphor. And metaphor is just one tool in the poet's toolkit. They also play with syntax to change up the rhythm. They use expressive sounds like rhyme to create music. And they pull out all sorts of rhetorical devices to add emotional punch. It all works together to create that unique impact that only a poem can have. Okay, so once you've got a handle on these key ingredients, this emotional truth and this special language, you can start exploring all the different, shall we say, flavors of poetry that are out there. First up, you've got lyric poetry. These are usually shorter, really musical poems that feel like you're getting a direct peek into the speaker's mind. Think of it as the poetry of personal feeling, almost like a song that captures one single powerful emotion. Then there's narrative poetry, and just like the name suggests, this kind tells a story. You've got characters, a setting, a plot, the whole shebang, but it tells that story using the rich, expressive language of poetry. It's really where storytelling and verse collide. And finally, we have dramatic poetry. This stuff is written to be performed, spoken out loud. It's super closely tied to the theater, using dialogue and monologues to explore characters and their situations. So, we've got the building blocks, we've got the different types, which brings us to the biggest question of all. Why does any of this matter? What's the real takeaway here? When it comes right down to it, poetry matters because it does something no other kind of language can. It doesn't just report on life, it represents it with imagination. It gives a voice to our deepest, most complicated emotions, and it uses that unique, powerful language to get us thinking and feeling. And look, if there's just one thing you remember from all this, let it be this. In poetry, the message and the way it's delivered are totally intertwined. It's not just about the words, but about the rhythm, the sounds, the way the lines are broken. It's not just what is being said, but how it's said that creates the meaning. In the end, maybe the best way to think about poetry is as a special kind of lens. It's a way to look at the world and at ourselves with a little more depth, a little more imagination, and a whole lot more empathy. So the only real question left is, what are you going to see when you look through it?